Urban Cultural Studies,
the podcast.
Interviews.
And welcome to Urban Cultural Studies Podcast. Today our guest is Maja Klausen, who is a PhD scholar and lecturer/teacher at the University of Southern Denmark. Her research revolves around media geography, urban studies, and ethnography, and deals with the interweaving of urban space and culture with digital media technologies. Welcome to the program, Maja.
Thanks, Ben. It's good to be here.
So today we're talking about your article. It is titled Re-enchanting the City, Hybrid Space, Affect, and Playful Performance in Geocaching, a location-based mobile game.
Yes.
This is all based on research. You can call it ethnography or participant observation, perhaps performed in Copenhagen, Denmark. You've studied and taken part in this location-based game, really this phenomenon, which is called geocaching. And in your article, you're attentive to the scholarly literature from a few different disciplines. In your words, the contribution is, quote, a socio-spatial reading of how circulating people, technologies, objects, and representations perform places and urban social life.
Mm-hmm.
The first question many listeners might have, I think, is what exactly is geocaching?
Well, geocaching is such an interesting and playful phenomenon. Basically ties together people and places through the use of GPS technology. We could call it a GPS-enabled scavenger hunt, where the players hide things in physical spaces for others to find. And being a bit more specific, the hidden things are called caches. And when hiding a cache, you simply upload the GPS coordinates of the hiding place to the official geocaching website, which is geocaching.com.
And what can be accomplished through that site?
It makes it possible for others to go online and retrieve the coordinates, for instance, by downloading them into a handheld GPS device. Afterwards, it's simply a matter of getting out there and finding the cache.
Where do these caches tend to be hidden, and what happens once someone finds it?
They can be hidden anywhere, in urban areas as well as in the woods or countryside. Having found it, you have to log your find by writing your name in the logbook that every cache actually contains. And finally, you put the cache back into its hiding place for the next geocacher to find.
And there are a lot of these out there.
Oh, yes. The number of hidden caches worldwide is actually approaching 2.4 million. So it's not just a local phenomenon carried out by a small group of people in Copenhagen where I did my fieldwork.
Yeah.
One interesting aspect, I think, about the game is how the geocachers, or players, as I call them in my article, how they use the game to share places and locations that, for one reason or another, they feel are worth sharing. Maybe it's a hidden gem known only to locals, or maybe the place has an interesting history attached to it.
So this is a way to get to know places.
For some geocachers, the game functions actually as a tour guide, pointing to the cities they visit.
Yeah.
For instance, when on vacation and through searching for caches, the players experience hidden and local sites and places that ordinary tourists perhaps don't seek out, as they aren't listed in the official guides. Another fascinating aspect is the ways in which the game world of geocaching becomes intertwined with the urban life unfolding around the game. And I say urban life since I studied only urban geocaching practices. Pedestrians passing the geocachers, cars driving by, and so on. These are all elements that become enrolled in the game, making the search for caches more challenging and more fun.
The spatial aspect and the urban aspect of your research of geocaching is really quite intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to hear a bit more about your research method. That is, you've interviewed a number of geocachers in the Copenhagen area and have actually participated in geocaching, hunting down caches in an urban area. I'd like to ask you to talk a bit about how you first became interested in this.
Yeah.
Was it easy for you to step into the game?
I've done several qualitative studies of different urban cultures, actually. A few years ago, I was conducting an ethnographic field study amongst Copenhagen parkour practitioners.
Oh yeah, parkour. I want to jump in and say that listeners can read your article in volume 1.2 of the Journal of urban cultural studies, and also mentioned that there's an article on parkour in volume 1.1 of the journal.
Parkour at that time was still a subcultural phenomenon.
I can see the connection there.
I know, and I guess that this connection between my different research topics was this interest in urban space and especially subcultural use and production of urban spaces. And this led me both into studying the phenomenon of parkour as well as geocaching later on. I've also written about the subculture of urban exploration where practitioners access and explore abandoned and derelict buildings or factories. I think I'm curious about how urban space is both planned, negotiated, lived and experienced.
Right.
I think that by studying urban subcultural phenomena, we can get a look into how urban space is negotiated and also to some extent reclaimed as the subcultures use and also become dependent on media and digital technologies in a process of mediatization. They tend to become mainstream. And within this process, there are moments of true mixing of spaces, cultures, and interests. We could call them third spaces drawing on Satya. And these spaces, I think, hold potential for participation and transformation. So I see media and digital technologies as a key concern, obviously, when researching contemporary urban cultures.
So what are the connections between media and the urban?
Wow, yeah. Where to start? We could take, for instance, the many recently developed terms trying to capture the media and the urban as interconnected and interdependent processes. You have media city, smart city, or Stephen Graham's more ANT-oriented concept of cyber city.
And ANT stands for Actor Network Theory.
Yes, it does. And with these concepts, we've left behind the dystopian and yet dazzling scenarios painted by, for instance, McLuhan's Global Village and later on in the quote-unquote end of the city discourse pointed to by Graham, and tied to the early days of the internet where everyone's hopes were high and the sky was the limit. And well, these cyber-utopian scenarios, they didn't hold.
Right.
The physical structure of the city didn't become obsolete as our lives became intertwined with technology that made it possible for us to do our work, grocery shopping, and maintain relations to others without leaving our homes. I guess summing up, technology didn't make place obsolete. Quite the opposite, actually. Today we have technologies that support that need we have to create our own routes, places and spaces in the cities where we live. For instance, in the case of parkour, the Web 2.0 technology of the social media, YouTube, became an important actor as it disseminated and maintained and transformed the phenomenon together with the human actors, the traceurs, as they're called. In the case of urban exploration, for instance, uploading pictures on social media sites of the abandoned buildings visited is an important part of the practice, the sharing of photos online.
Yeah.
And finally, if we look at geocaching, we see how GPS technology and mobile media, or we could say handheld devices, facilitate a sharing of places and stories about places. And this playful exploration of technological affordances on one hand and of the world we inhabit on the other, the cities and places we live in and travel through, well, that was what caught my attention in geocaching. I wanted to get a look into this peculiar phenomenon, hoping to learn something about how people go about playing with technologies and places at the same time.
So what does one need to become a geocacher?
It actually requires nothing more than creating a free profile online and reading up on the most basic rules. And of course you have to have access to a GPS device of some sort or a smartphone with built-in GPS technology.
Well, and not everyone has a GPS.
Not everyone can afford a GPS, which is also why there are more hidden caches in Europe and USA than you'll find in Africa or India, for instance.
We could talk here about the uneven geography of technologies.
In this manner, you have a digital divide within this phenomenon, since access to the technology required isn't distributed equally. But Besides having access to the technology, stepping into the game is easy. I simply downloaded the geocaching app on my phone, push the Find Nearby Caches button, and chose one of the hits. And what struck me most at first was how different it felt walking the streets of Copenhagen, where I live, in search of cache than simply walking the dog or getting groceries. One of my research participants said that it feels like you're on some secret mission or something. And I think that describes the feeling you get when you're out geocaching quite well, actually.
Regarding the ethnographic component of your research, the players you interviewed and so on, how willing were other players to speak with you?
Well...
And how serious of a player are you in comparison to other geocachers you've met?
Well, since I was curious about the socio-spatial elements connected to geocaching and curious about the geocaching experience and how urban space is performed and transformed, I used ethnographic methods as I also did in my studies of parkour and urban exploration. Instead of studying representations and meanings alone, I believe ethnography is a fruitful way to go. Ethnography offers, I think, a method through which you can tap into how such performances of places, of technologies and social life actually come into being. And you ask me also how willing other players were to speak to me.
Yeah, well, I imagine many players might be eager to talk in depth about something that they love to do.
Exactly. Generally, the geocaching community, this not only goes for the Danish geocaching community, is very welcoming and willing to share information and also open to newbies. In this manner, it resembles a participatory culture as described by Richard Jenkins, amongst others.
Sure.
The more experienced geocachers function as mentors, guiding and helping newbies getting started. And generally, geocachers share their experiences online with each other and tell about must-find caches and so on. I actually contacted one of these mentor geocachers and told her about my research project. She then suggested some geocachers I could contact in order to find research participants. And almost everyone I contacted were positive towards being part of the research project. But one male geocacher explained to me that he had to decline as he believed that geocaching was getting too big.
It should continue to be a small-scale practice? He didn't want it to go mainstream?
No, he didn't. And he was not alone in this concern about the phenomenon becoming too big. He thought that too many people already knew about the game, and research like mine would only intensify the focus on and curiosity about this subculture, as he called it. He believed that the game world, as he said, would lose its magic if everyone knew about it. And this is a classical characteristic of a subculture. The members fear of becoming mainstream and their need to distinguish themselves from mainstream culture.
Well, let's not tell him about this interview then.
No, better keep this between the two of us. But getting back to your question regarding my seriousness as a player, I was and still am a geocaching rookie. Most of the research participants were what I would call hardcore or expert players, and they had found hundreds of caches. And following a group of serious players allowed me to get a look into the game-related and competitive aspects of geocaching.
Like what?
For instance, some of the expert geocachers compete against themselves to reach goals they set for themselves. An example is reaching the number 500 found cache. Others aim at keeping an area, often an area they live in, quote-unquote, clean of not found caches, so that you will have found all the caches in the area in which you live. And you also have this ongoing competition of becoming first finder of a cache when it is released, as it's called. And following these more serious players brought about great insights into these competitive aspects.
What are the more innovative hiding places for caches that you've heard about or have seen personally? Are there any interesting stories you've amassed along with your finds?
First of all, let me say that the creativity surrounding this game is amazing, I think. players often put a lot of effort and thoughts into making innovative and surprising caches for others to find. One of the perhaps most interesting ones that I've heard of is, and I haven't logged this one myself, it's a cache in Berlin on Potsdamer Platz. I don't know if it still exists, but several of the research participants talked about this particular cache and had a great time finding it. They told me that on Potsdamer Platz you can find a life-size giraffe made of Lego building blocks. I suppose it's an advertising stunt made by Lego.
Which is a Danish company, if I'm not mistaken, Lego.
That's true. Lego ought to be paying me for this. Well, one of the many Lego blocks used to make this giraffe is actually a cache, a Lego building block with a geocaching logbook inside of it. So you have to carefully search the giraffe in order to find that one little yellow or brown Lego block containing the logbook.
I'm imagining the looks one might get frisking a large Lego giraffe there.
Yeah, I know, right? That awkward feeling you get when behaving in a manner that falls outside of what we could call standard behavior in public space. Well, this feeling actually is a big part of geocaching in the city. People will look twice when you sit on someone's shoulders fumbling around the top of a lamppost.
This is something you've done.
This actually happened. It was me on the top of a research participant's shoulders.
Now, how did you explain what you were doing?
I simply told passers-by that we were replacing an old light bulb. Yeah. And also you have to avoid drawing too much attention to yourself, because if a cache is found by a non-geocacher, it might risk being mistaken for trash and thrown away. One research participant also told me about a cache hidden somewhere in Copenhagen airport.
Now that's a high level of difficulty.
When searching for this cache, there's a risk that you might come off looking a bit suspicious, and this could cause problems in an airport. This sort of hiding place takes the game into places where games are not supposed to be played, and hereby pushes the limits regarding where we think games might take place.
Right, the limits, the boundaries of the game are an interesting point in themselves. And one of the points your article makes, well, it has to do with these, quote, edges of the magic circle of play.
Yes.
What is this notion of the magic circle? Where does the idea come from? How does geocaching as a mobile game change the way this circle operates? That is, as your article makes clear, to ask this question is simultaneously to ask what effect the urban practice of geocaching has on the city, on our relationship to it.
Yes. Well, the magic circle of play is a metaphor that denotes the space we enter into when we begin to play. The concept was introduced in 1950 by the Dutch cultural historian Johan Huizinga in his book Homo Ludens, the study of the play element in culture, it's called. Huizinga describes the participation in a game as a sort of stepping out of quote-unquote real life into a temporal sphere of activity, into a magic circle of play. For Huizinga, playing a game is something different and separate from our quote-unquote ordinary lives.
And of course, in 1950, he wasn't talking about geocaching by any stretch of the imagination, but yet his work resonates still today?
It definitely does. He pointed to play as an integral part of culture, and it's interesting to look at how play and urban cultures come into existence today in relation to geocaching, or probably any other of the many pervasive games many of us are playing on our smartphones today. The notion of the magic circle of play needs to be readdressed, as also pointed to by scholars Montula, De Souza, Silva and Sutko. Pervasive games as geocaching are games that very often rely on ubiquitous and mobile technologies in expanding the space of play in a way that blurs the borders between play and non-play. This problematizes Huizinga's definition of the magic circle, which is one where those borders are clearly marked.
Yeah.
Briefly, we can say that the pervasive game expands temporally, socially, and spatially, and create digital and physical worlds of play in everyday environments. And these environments were of key concern in my study of urban geocaching. There are some very interesting and playful elements connected to geocaching in the city, and they all revolve around keeping the game a secret. Passers-by aren't supposed to know that you're searching for hidden items in the surroundings. If everyone knows about it, it quote-unquote loses its magic, as described by research participants. Playing the game is also described as being a part of a secret society.
This notion of the secret mission you were talking about earlier.
Where players have access to this magic world of hidden items unknown to non-players. In fact, and this is interesting, I think, non-players are referred to as muggle, in reference to persons without magical abilities in the Harry Potter novels. So in order to disguise the game and in order to keep it a secret, research participant told me to pretend to be tying my shoelace, for instance, when I actually was squatting and searching for a cache hidden close to the ground because muggle were watching or passing by.
So there's a degree of performance here. One has to negotiate the boundaries of the game world in a practical sense, but there's an element of theater, of disguise.
There is the bodily performances made by players in order to blend in are in fact highly performative. Another way to disguise that you are playing the game of geocaching, I found out, was to pretend to be using your GPS device or smartphone as a camera, when in reality you are searching for a cache hidden on, for instance, a statue, and not at all taking pictures of it. So you have this range of playful practices which increase the play experience for players, simply make it more fun and exciting to play. And through these practices, the urban surroundings, they are reinterpreted in a playful manner, which causes a potential re-enchanting of the urban space.
Absolutely.
And what is interesting with these practices is the way that the players creatively draw on and integrate in the game the contingencies and what I refer to as affective potential tied to urban space. The unpredictability of the constantly changing urban surroundings is incorporated into the game as an asset, making it more challenging to play. So for the player, the urban space is appropriated and interpreted in relation to the game as it becomes infused with playful performances.
Another term you use in your article is hybrid space, which seems important as well. How do you see the relationship between digital space and physical space in today's cities?
Yes, well, I use the term hybrid space when trying to capture part of what is going on as we use digital technologies when moving around in cities. And this discussion of the blurring of borders between digital and physical spaces has been going on for several years now, and at least since the internet became mobile. And I think it would be hard finding someone who would advocate upholding a clear-cut theoretical or analytical distinction between the two.
Right. There are a variety of terms in use that point to this imbrication of the digital and the physical.
Exactly. Examples could be augmented reality, mixed reality, or ubiquitous computing. Each of these address this blurring of borders between the digital and the physical. But these definitions tend to see the blurring as a solely technological issue and hereby ignoring the user and his or her appropriation of the technological affordances at hand. Hybridity I see as an emerging property of an assemblage consisting of the part digital, part physical space afforded by the mobile and digital technology in combination with the user's appropriation hereof. Hybridity therefore emerged as an outcome of the interplay between the user's imagination, the screen, and the physical surroundings of the city. The way the user interprets and performs the possibilities given to him or her through the mixing of the digital and the physical therefore becomes a key concern when defining a hybrid space. For instance, in geocaching, if the player didn't creatively appropriate and interpret his or her surroundings in a playful manner in relation to the game, the streets, they'd simply, quote-unquote, return to their everyday status, to borrow the words of pervasive play theorist Eva Newdorp. Therefore, when addressing the blurring of borders between digital and physical spaces in cities today, I believe we'll miss out on important findings if we simply grasp hybridity as a technological property. I mean, it is obviously also that, of course, but we only paint half the picture of urban everyday life with mobile technology if we do not push the definition of hybridity and incorporate into it the manifold ways that users mentally and bodily perform this hybrid space, and thereby contribute to it.
So what do we need to keep in mind as this type of research continues to unfold?
I think we need to attend to how the technology is being appropriated and made useful, and how this appropriation affects and is affected by urban space and life in the late modern city on a larger scale. Who could ever have predicted that the affordances entailed in GPS technology would be used as creatively and playful as in the case with geocaching? I mean, we don't simply use this technology to find our way around. We play with it and we play around it, creating stories about places and changing the overall texture of the urban fabric, making it more open to play. And it is this process I refer to as carrying with it a potential re-enchantment of urban space, looking at media as practice and exploring what bodies do in relation to media and how media and place intertwine. Well, this provides a way into a discussion of what life in hybrid part digital, part physical cities might actually entail.
Thanks for being here, Maja.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Maja Klausen's article, Re-enchanting the City, Hybrid Space, Affect, and Playful Performance in Geocaching, a location-based mobile game, is published in the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies 1.2, 2014. Also, be sure to check out her article on media, urban space, and the subculture of urban exploration, titled Making Place in the Media City, published in the peer-reviewed journal Culture Unbound, Volume 4, 2012. Remember that you can access the Journal of Urban Cultural Studies in both print and online formats through Intellect Publishers, and make sure to follow our multi-authored blog for more urban discussions at urbanculturalstudies.wordpress.com.